Can you hear me now?
It looks like we're just waiting for David to kind of get. So, are you going somewhere? Oh, okay. So we'll just wait for you to get where you're going to. Are we good? And I
I
said,
think it's on
Okay.
mute.
Yeah, sorry, I just tried to find the right spot in the house here.
Oh, what's that picture up there?
Yeah, that's an icon of something apparently.
CC.
Janet was coming to this meeting.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
that's me.
I
I'm
think
here.
you're
I can
here.
hear you. I can see you. I'm
Yeah,
good.
you're a little bit. Kilroy was here. We can just see like the top of your head and your fan. So
I can see from the comments on the chat that some of what we have seen and what we tried to express in our skit was familiar to some of you as well. And so we find that there are some recurring things that we run into in meetings. And then there's always something new, some difficulty that people have with connecting. And it does take time. So if we think about connecting, let's start with that. If we're going to have an annual meeting, the first challenge is to get everybody connected. So Scott, let's you and I talk about that for a bit.
sure.
One of the things that we do and that you will have noticed that we did in order to get into this is that we use registration and we use a paid Zoom account for most of our meetings. And so, Scott, why do we use registration for things?
Well, so before that, why do we have a paid account?
Yeah.
The paid account that we do is a kind of the lowest paid account, which is $149 a year, and that allows us to have meetings that go as long as we want them to go. If you're doing a free account, you're going to be limited to 40 minutes, and you can chain them. You can sort of say we're meet for 40 minutes, and then everyone go away and come back, and we'll do another one. But that's if you want to kind of go along, and also if you want to have more than one meeting going on at the same time, you have to have more than one account. So that's why we have that account. And for registration, when we're setting up a meeting, I think registration is partly a security thing. It allows me to kind of look through the list of everyone who's registered and kind of go, "Ooh, that doesn't sound like a real name. That sounds like a made-up name. I think that person might be a bit sketchy. Let's take them off the list." It also gives me a list of everybody who is, for example, in this meeting is everyone who's registered, so that I can send you an email afterwards to say, "Here's the video for this thing," or "Here's some follow-up thing." So that's one of the reasons we register.
One of the other things that having registration was, I was really glad we had registration for this meeting, because we often have about 30 people come to one of our CCS Friday workshops, and you can see we're sitting at 100 participants. So knowing that we had that many people coming meant that we did two things. One was we actually bumped up our capacity for Zoom, because we didn't want anyone to get locked out of the meeting in case we had more people than our Zoom account, regular Zoom account, will host. And we also actually changed our agenda, because we had a couple of things we were planning on doing that wouldn't work with a group this big. So I really like registration for that as well. The way that you register is when you're setting up the Zoom meeting, there is an option to say, do you want people to have to register for this meeting, or is just having the link sufficient? So for most of the meetings that I go to, and all of the meetings that we do internally at our school, we would just be sending one another a Zoom link. But for a larger public event like this, we use registration. And for the reasons that Scott gave, it allows us to do some different things. So for an annual meeting of a congregation, or for the annual meeting of our school, I would really recommend using registration if that's an option for you, simply because of some of the reasons that we've outlined. Now, Scott, do you now you're the host of this, and I think you've got me set up as a co-host.
That's right.
So let's talk for a minute about that. When we went through, we had a not last minute, but this morning, let's run over the agenda one more time. And that meant that we know Scott is hosting, so he's kind of running the back end. And then Lori and I have more of the kind of hosting the conversation responsibilities. So for a lot of the meetings that we run, we will try and have one person who is technically hosting the meeting, but it might be someone else who is kind of facilitating or chairing the meeting or having the conversation. What is that? What do you like about that, Scott?
I mean, it's a lot of focus to kind of keep track of everything that's going on, and so if it's a small meeting, it's okay for me to kind of go, okay, hang on for a second while I need to find this thing over here to get us into the, okay, there it is. But if we're working as a team, you, Michelle, can be facilitating the meeting, keeping the conversation going while I'm getting a breakout room set up, while I'm kind of looking through the list to make sure that everybody is there, is muted, is unmuted, whatever they need to be. It's also useful, like I'm noticing that a number of comments are kind of coming into the chat box. So as we're having this conversation, I'm not necessarily reading those things in the chat, but I think Lori maybe is. And so at another point in the meeting, Lori can sort of throw in a question, say that, Vince had a question. Here's his question. I think it's useful to kind of work as a team in that way.
Yeah. When it's not something we do so much anymore, although we've done it sometimes with new students, or we've done it with our AGM. Do you still hold test calls with people? When do you do that?
I'm open to it. I think as people are becoming kind of more familiar with this stuff, they need it less, but it's always useful to kind of be available to sort of say, well, okay, let's you and I will just have a quick call to make sure that you know where your mute button is, how you change the view, what's plugged into what, all that stuff, just to kind of reduce some of the stress at the beginning of the meeting. Because especially if people don't have a lot of experience with computers or with video stuff, they could be coming in kind of, this isn't working, what's going on? And you want to be entering into your meeting, fairly relaxed and fairly calm.
Yeah. So I have a family member who lives down at the Fred Douglas, one of the co-ops. And when they had their annual meeting, they held multiple test meetings for the residents before holding the annual meeting to give people practice at logging in and connecting and even using features like voting. And I think the Prairie to Pine regional meeting did that as well. Before we had our regional meeting, we had a day with a test meeting. So if your congregation or your folks who would come to an annual meeting aren't on Zoom all the time, having just a test meeting is a great time just to connect and to do some of that troubleshooting, because it can get really complicated when I'm using one kind of device. I'm on a laptop 90% of the time, but I don't necessarily know what the iPad interface looks like or what buttons someone has to push if they're using their smartphone. So if you have folks on a whole bunch of devices, having a test is really good for that.
And I think knowing that things look different depending on what kind of device you're using is really useful to sort of say, well, I've got a button that's over here. Where is it for you?
Yeah. And you might have someone else on the call who says, well, I have an iPad, and for me, that function is on the bottom of my screen or the top of my screen or wherever it is.
So someone was asking about the nuances of those. How can they find out a little bit more about what the difference are between a phone, a laptop, and an iPad?
I find that the best way is to be talking to someone who's using something different. And just sort of say, where is it for you? And spending the time going, oh, hang on, let me look around. I also, when I'm kind of preparing for something, will start a meeting and log in from another device just so that I can see what it looks like. And I might have a meeting, 3 versions of me in a meeting, 3 different devices just to see what the interface looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've used my phone and my laptop, so I know a little bit about that. But a bunch of it is just trial and error, honestly, is what we've found. So, and when you're doing that kind of thing, I would say, Scott, the directions that I hear you giving people is how to mute and unmute, how to change their names, some of those things that we were doing in our skit as well. How much time do you spend troubleshooting technical difficulties? And how do you make the judgment call that, you know, I've got 100 people in this meeting and I have to move on?
That's a hard one. And I think I just do it by intuition. Some people for this meeting, some people logged in half an hour early just to kind of make sure their stuff was working, which is a great idea. And some people didn't do it intentionally. One of the things that I've just changed in my settings is if you're hosting, I encourage you to kind of look through your settings on the website and kind of see what's there, because there are things that aren't checked off by default, but that you might want. And so one of the ones that I just checked off recently is support. So as well as kind of putting into breakout rooms, I can also just pull you and me off into like a separate little room to kind of talk you through some technical things if we need to, without disrupting everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think it's the same as if you were in a meeting in person, you know, gauging the participation and the accessibility for individual people compared to the needs of the whole group to kind of keep moving.
And so we know that people come into, you know, our meetings, these meetings, this workshop with a whole bunch of different kinds of Zoom experience. Some of us are on Zoom meetings multiple times a day, and maybe some folks here, this is the first time they've connected. And Zoom has, we switched to Zoom a few years ago because we just like it. So we're not, this is not a paid product placement, but this software, like others, has all kinds of different functionality, including polls. So let's take a poll. Have you got one for us, Scott?
Let's see if can you see that?
I can see it.
Okay, so a thing may have popped up on your screen that has a poll question and a place where you can kind of vote. And as people are voting, you can see that our numbers and our percentages are changing. And you can sort of set how much time you want for the vote. There's a little timer at the top that says how much time you've had, but you can say, okay, you've got a minute or 2 minutes to register your vote.
So we have at least one person who has joined us by phone, Scott. So they're not able to see this poll. Would that be right? I
think that's probably true. And Heather, if somehow you are getting a message about a poll, you could maybe unmute yourself and let us know, but I've never tried it on with a phone. So
how would Heather know how to unmute herself? If someone's on the phone, how do they do that?
If you're just on a phone, like you're just in through audio, *6 will mute and unmute yourself, and *9 will kind of raise your hand if you want to sort of say, hello, I either want to vote or I want to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Polls are set up. You can, when you're setting up your meeting, down near the bottom of that, all that setup stuff, around the, you know, setting up the date, the name of the meeting, there's a place where you can set up polls. If you in your settings have said, I want to be able to use polls, and then in that poll section, you can create your question and create your possible answers. And then when it gets to actually in the meeting, you've got a thing called polling among my controls, and you can launch whatever polls you want to use.
Yeah, so I think maybe the poll interface is different for you and I, Scott, than it is for the people who are just participants. So I can see percentages of what people have been voting on, but I think maybe other people, I don't know that they can. They can't. They're shaking their heads. Right. So only you and I know how the polling is trending.
Well, so yeah, I could see the numbers coming in. That's right. And so now that it's in, I can then choose to share it. And you can see that most people have got some experience. A few people have got a lot of experience. And there's some people who've got just too much experience.
There we go. Someone asked about the difference between different platforms. So like I said, we switched to Zoom a few years ago. We always hold our AGM at a distance because we're a national school and we have a national cohort of people and alumni. So it's the software that we're the most familiar with. And as we keep going today, some of the tips we give are going to be Zoom specific, like how do you set up a poll on Zoom? And some of them are going to be I think generally best practices for meeting online. Some of the questions that we knew were coming were a little specific about voting, so we decided to lean on Jody's expertise. So Jody and Lori, why don't you talk to us a little bit about, oh my goodness, how do we handle voting?
Yeah, so why don't you, there have been a number of questions about voting, and what is your experience of the best way to do a vote, not a secret ballot? No.
Yeah. So when we did our regional meeting, we actually used the yes, no buttons, but we have now shifted to using the raise hand. And for most of you, it's probably in your reactions. But some of you, if you're not in the most recent version of Zoom, it will still be in your participants list. And the reasons we like the raised hands is, first of all, both people on the phone and people in the meeting by video can participate using the raised hands. You can leave them up until your host has counted and or co-host, and then we can put everyone's hands down. It's a fairly quick count. And I mean, if people put their hands up visually, you have to make sure you can see, but your host or your co-host can have the participant list open and they can monitor it. And what we did in our regional meeting, a couple of things. We had a person monitoring the participants list who was not the facilitator, not the chair of the meeting. And you're right, the co-host and the host can't raise their hands. In our circumstances, it was all staff who couldn't vote anyways. So it worked for us. But so we had someone monitoring that, and they would, so the chair would say, all those in favor, please raise your hand and leave it raised. And then the person monitoring would say those votes are counted. The other thing that we did, and I saw this was one question, if you've got more than one person on a device together on a laptop, we had one person vote by raising their hand and the other person vote in the chat box. And we had a designated co-host that you sent your vote to, so that person kept track of those. That was also the person who kept track of people abstaining. So if anyone wanted to abstain, they could type that into the chat box to the co-host. And also that person kept track of any points of order. So
what about if someone's on the phone and they want to vote? How
so
do they do that?
they actually can also raise their hands. I think it's *9.
Oh,
Scott
right.
might know that better than me. Yeah, and so it actually works better when you use raise hand, because you can take those all at the same time. When we used the yes, no buttons, we had to have everybody on screen vote, and then we had to have everybody on the phone vote separately, and it was very labor intensive.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And there was a question about whether we should just call for those against and assume that everybody else is in favor. What do you think about that?
So what I feel like you can do that, because if you look in the manual, in the appendix that is about sort of a shortened rules of order, it does say that a vote may be taken in a manner determined by the council. So you could determine to do your vote in that way. Personally, I'm not super in favor of it. And the reason for that is it assumes that everybody who doesn't vote no or doesn't abstain is voting yes. And sometimes people might be just not choosing to vote at all for a number of reasons. And they might not feel, I mean, we tend to use abstain in a very formal way. I want people to know that I'm not voting because I might have a perceived or a real conflict of interest. And so I want it recorded that I did not vote. Other people might just not care. And so I personally prefer to ask for those who vote in favor and then ask for those who vote against, and then people who want to abstain can go in the chat box.
Okay. What about secret ballots? Is there any possibility of voting that in some fashion?
So yes, so a poll is secret to most people unless your host has asked to be able to see who votes. And I think the host can do that. But a poll, of course, as we already noted, people on the phone can't do. We had prepared to, if we needed a secret ballot, we had one of our admin staff was going to be able to create something on our website. And I think you could also do something perhaps on Google Docs. There is also a paid voting a source that you can use, and so they manage the votes for you. All of those require people to be able to go to another site. And so it does require some tech savvy. And like for someone like me, I've got actually 3 screens open, so I can easily open another screen and go to a website and vote, but it would definitely be complicated. What we had decided we would do if someone really felt strongly that we needed a secret ballot on something, and this is one of the beauties of an online meeting, is we would say we can't have that vote today right now. Then we need to pause on that, and we'll need to regather when we can have a vote by secret ballot.
Okay.
We also had an option to vote by email. And so if everybody sends an email to one person, it does mean one person is going to know everybody's votes, but it's a way to vote, and it is allowed in our polity.
Yeah, okay, thank you. There's a few there that I hadn't heard about. Shannon McCarthy in our region has put an article up on our website about voting, secret ballot voting, and we'll send you the link to that as well. So how about taking attendance to track a quorum and to look at who are members and who are not?
So that's one of the ways that your pre-registration that was talked about earlier is really important, because if you know who's coming in advance, you can match that against your list of members. What we did as well was we asked anyone who is not a member to put a Z in front of their name, and that meant that in the participants list, their name drops to the bottom of the list. It just made it easier for our scrutineers when they were counting raised hands to be sure. It also raises that important point that we now can allow adherents to vote. And so one of your important votes that you may want to have at the beginning of your meeting is on whether or not you're going to allow adherents to vote. But then you also have to know who your adherents are, because there may be people in your meeting who wouldn't even qualify as an adherent. And so you want to make sure that they're noted.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you want to just talk about some basic things about setting up your meeting, preparing your motions in advance and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we definitely did have all of our motions on PowerPoint, and we posted them on the screen. And part of the reason we did that was so that if there were changes that could be seen by the group as a whole. And then we also had a separate person who was taking minutes, but we'd have it on both the PowerPoint and the minutes. So we had those two things to compare. And we had a separate, I mean, again, when you're in a really large meeting, we had a separate person doing some of the work that Scott would be doing as a tech person from the person who was running the PowerPoint, so that we didn't, people could really focus on their roles. So the person who did the PowerPoint, they were just doing the PowerPoint, and that was really helpful. We also worked from a very structured script. So our chairperson we all had the same script. We all knew, and so like he knew exactly what to say, and to say, we're going to post the motion on the PowerPoint now. I'm going to read it. We're now going to take it down. I'm going to call for this vote. I'm going to call for that vote. And so we had we had it very scripted, and it helped for those who were doing the tech because they knew what was coming next. We also spotlighted our chairperson, and our scrutineers. And we found that was helpful. And by spotlighting, what I mean is so that those are the faces that you see on your screen. And we find that was really helpful because it is very distracting to have a bunch of people on the screen and you're not sure where the chair is and who's speaking. And we chose to put our scrutineers on there as well to reinforce that somebody actually is paying attention to the participant list. Here is, you know, Scott, who is watching the list and who is saying all the votes have been counted. We found that was a helpful thing. The other thing that we did that we think is important, and I was talking about this a bit in our breakout, we turn off the chat so that you can only chat to your host or co-hosts. And we do that because it's very distracting when somebody is speaking to have the chat going all the time. To my mind, it's the equivalent of somebody speaking at the mic and somebody else jumps up and starts talking. We wouldn't allow that in an in-person meeting, so we didn't allow it in our regional annual meeting as well. And we found that really helpful. And if someone has a question and they put it into the chat to one of the hosts, we can bring it into the meeting at an appropriate time. We also made use of our scrutineers for monitoring our speakers list. So we asked people to raise their hand in the reactions or the participant list, and then our scrutineers would say, you know, to the chair, we've got Michelle and Lori and Scott waiting in line to speak. And again, it was reassuring to know that you had been seen, you were going to get your turn, and the chair didn't have to be monitoring that. I don't know if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Thank you very much. I think we are going to move on to Michelle.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jody. And one of the things that that jumps out for me when I hear Jody talk about this is how different it is for her and the region to be running a big regional meeting for a few hundred participants versus what we do at a workshop for 100 people versus what we might do at the center when we might have 50 people on our annual meeting versus what we do in terms of motions and preparations for our council, which might be 15 people. So if some of this sounds overwhelming, I want you to remember that this is a platform, it's actually just like worship. Size really matters. It matters whether you're preparing worship for 15 people in person or 500 people in person. And when you are planning meetings online, it matters whether you are expecting 15 people, 20 people to show up for your church annual meeting, or whether you are expecting 300 people to show up for your church annual meeting. Because some of trying to pay attention to the votes and the ballots and all of these things it's going to depend how it gets much more complicated when you have a much bigger meeting. It also is you're going to want to think about what your community is like. So do you have folks that are really quite tech savvy and comfortable who are going to be able to take on leadership roles throughout the meeting? Are you going to have people who are really uncomfortable with this? How much time do you need to spend just helping people get comfortable with it? Some of what we find is that in our school, we talk about circles. We meet in learning circles. When we're together, we physically put our chairs in circles. And so our online practices reflect the way that we do things in person. And we're going to do that too. You're going to do that. You're going to bring your in-person culture online with you. And so for us, it's important that everyone has a chance to speak. And since we aren't sitting in a circle, moving around, each person talking in turn, some of what we do is often go by invitation. And so when I'm done talking, I might say, Janet, do you want to add something in? If we have a bunch of people, because everyone's Hollywood Square arrangement order is different on the screen, we would have the host maybe track so that they are inviting people to speak in turn. We have found that just generally asking, what do you think, doesn't work very well online, that people either are shy to unmute themselves and talk, or that 5 people jump in and you get kind of a mess. So we have moved towards inviting and speaking in turn, and making that space for people to talk. We also find that breakout groups are the best way to hold space for conversation, that it's easier to have, 3 people have a conversation about something and the breakout groups report back than to have 30 people on a call and try and have a conversation about something. I see someone's asked a question about seconding on a motion, and what we do with some of our meetings is we have the movers and seconders all set up ahead of time, and we also have screen shares with the motions set up ahead of time, so that people, who's going to make the motion, who's going to second the motion, and you've got the motion ready to go. Because frankly, for an annual meeting, a lot of the time you're not having people throw motions at you from the floor. You know what a lot of those motions are going to be ahead of time, and you can have them all set up. We're going to receive the committee reports. We're going to pass the budget. Motions are sometimes spontaneous, and then you can take them spontaneously. But if you know this is a motion you need to bring, you can have it set up ahead of time. And I think what else I would say is, you're going to make mistakes and it's going to be okay. That some of what I would recommend is it just takes a bit of practice. So there have been lots of specific questions come up about, how do I do this or how do I do that? And what we do is, when we're wondering that, we open up a meeting and say, let's test it out. So we might have 3 staff people on a meeting and go, well, what happens if we do this? And what happens if we do that? If I send you into breakout rooms and then I try and send you a message, what does that look like? And then we come back together and we try and figure it out. So, practice. Practice and prepare would be the things that I would kind of close with. And know that we're all learning in this, and that in my experience, folks in congregations and ministry are really generous with the reality that we're all learning to do this. If your folks haven't been together online, they might be emotional at seeing one another. And if they haven't had a lot of chance to be together, use a breakout group so that people have a chance to check in with one another and see each other and hear one another. I think we're running close to the end of our time. So I'm going to invite Janet to close us with with some more words of scripture from Paul as we move towards closing our time this morning.
This is from 1 Corinthians 16, verses 19 and 20. The churches here in Western Asia send greetings. Aquila and Prisca and the church that meets in their house send their warm greetings. All the chosen family here send greetings to you. Pass warm greetings around to one another with love and with care.
Paul's letters remind us that our churches have always navigated community life over distances, that we've always had decisions to make, and we've managed to do it. So for 2,000 years, we have figured this out, and I know that you will continue to figure this out in new creative ways that are what is good for your community to be making decisions. So thank you so much. Again, a welcome especially to folks who haven't met us before. As Lori said at the beginning, we are the Center for Christian Studies. We're one of the theological schools affiliated with the United Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada. We host lots of continuing education as well as our diaconal and deacon training programs. And if you want to contribute to the life and work and learning at the center, We are very grateful for donations and certainly rely on them to keep doing the educational work that we do. And we will be following up with an email, since you all registered, with a link to some resources. And a very special thank you again to Jody for joining us and bringing us that wisdom and experience. And to all of you, we're just thrilled that so many of you joined us today. Thanks so much, folks. The staff are going to hang online for a little bit longer today. So if there is, if you had a question that you wanted to ask us, we might not know the answer, but we're certainly happy to talk about it with you. And I will keep us to our time and say thank you and blessings. And for those of you who are moving into a long weekend, happy Louis Riel Day. And thanks so much for joining us today. Bye-bye, folks.